Welcome everyone, I'm Martin Perhiniak, and today I'm going to show you how I designed this digital artwork. The original photograph is here on the background layer, and I've built up all the other layers on top of it. So that's what I've started working with, and then first I created these floral motifs in the background, or we can call hair, so these strands in the background. And then I created some in the foreground, in the front. I also created stars, and then I added a glow on the top. So this is how I built it up. So again, I removed the glow, I removed the stars, I removed the strands in front, and I removed the strands in the background. Now, first of all, what you need to do is to create a precise selection, because we would like to put those things in the background, and for that we need a selection around her, Keira Knightley, the actress. So I have this folder here, or group of layers, and I have a mask. If I alt click on the mask, you can see my selection, or my mask around her. So you can see this is my selection, and this is what I used to hide those details of the strands. So if I alt click again on the mask and I shift click on the mask now, I can disable the mask, and then you can see those elements are actually in front of her, but I'm using the mask to hide these details and to give the impression of that they are behind her. Okay, so now I shift click again on the mask just to activate the mask and to move those strands behind her. Okay, now to create that selection, I used first color range, and then I used the mask edge option. I'll show you this quickly. So I turn this off now, I select the background layer, and I go to select color range, and I start clicking on the background. It selects quickly the background elements or background colors. Then I hold down the shift key and drag over the details like this, and continue doing it here on the top, and I try to select all the colors, and then I can change the tolerance a bit just to find the edges properly, something like this. Maybe I start again because I just selected too much of the foreground as well as the background. By the way, if you want to see a larger preview of your selection, which is actually, it shows it as a mask, you can see that mask also in the background on the image. So you can choose black matte or white matte, or you can also choose grayscale, which is actually the same thing that we can see here in the color range dialog box. So now if I click again on the background, it shows the selected areas with white, and if I hold down the shift key, I can add these details to the selection. So I quickly click on these details, okay, and I try to select the areas, these areas, and I won't continue because now I have a proper selection around the hair, which is the most important part in this case. Maybe I just change it a bit like this, and then I click on OK. So I usually change the fuzziness, which is in this case the tolerance, to play with the edge, and then I click on OK. That makes a selection. Now I need to save this selection into a mask. So I go to the masks option and I click on add the pixel mask. This is the icon here. So I click on that and it creates the mask, but then I need to invert the mask like this. And here I can easily use my brush tool while the mask is selected. Make sure that your mask is selected and not the image. Okay, so here the mask has to be selected, and then use your brush tool with the black color selected as the foreground color, and just simply draw away the details that you definitely don't need. I just make my brush solid or a hard edge brush like this, and I quickly get rid of these details here, and then I click on the mask edge option to refine my mask further. So I click on mask edge and I select this option here on the top called on black. Okay, so I select on black. Actually, in this case, I think it's better to see on white. We see more details on white because the original background was dark, and that's why it's better to choose a view which is brighter, so to accurately see the edges. And what I usually use is just simply click on smart radius and increase the radius value, and you can see it's immediately much better. So if I press P or click on show original, I can see the original details, and if I press P again, I can see after. So again, before and after. Let's just zoom a little bit closer and see before and after. So much better. And I can even play with the shift edge. Sometimes I use shift edge and move it a little bit to the left. So again, see before and after. Okay, so I think this is a really nice selection around the edges. And of course here I have some problems, but we can solve that later. So now I click on OK. And I alt click on my mask just to see these problems and quickly draw over them with the brush. Make sure that your mask is selected. So I just use white here and draw over these details, also here. Okay, I just concentrate on the edges, and then I can use black to draw away these details quickly. Okay, like this. So this is a nice and quick way to do a selection, and I alt click on the mask now, and because I want to use this selection not on the image but for the elements that I would like to place behind her, that's why I create a new group and I click and drag this mask onto that group, and then I invert the mask because I need to hide her and show everything else around her, which will give the impression of having those elements behind her, as I said. Now comes the longer part where we need to design those swirls, but I will show you only one, how I designed one, and then you can imagine how I designed all the other ones. So I use my pen tool and I set it to the first option, which is the shape layer option. So with the pen tool shape layer option, and I just simply start drawing a shape. Click and drag will create curved shapes, and I just simply create a shape here. I use undo when I'm not happy with my curl. And this part is of course a bit difficult if you've never used the pen tool before, but there are useful keyboard shortcuts. For example, creating a corner point. Instead of continue this like this, having a curl there, you can alt click on that last point and then continue with a corner point. I call these corner points, so it makes a sharp edge. And then I can continue, and you can use Command or Control on PC to move these points around while you are drawing with the pen tool. Also useful to know. And let's just quickly finish this. I will make it a bit wider here intentionally, and then I close it. Yeah, and I can always adjust the curve if I want to. If I want to make it look smoother, for example here again I use command clicking and I just simply move these points around, so the anchor points and also these handles, and that will make my image nicer, or the details better. A continuous flow, that's what I'm looking for. Okay, so something like this. This is a nice swirl, and this is on a separate layer with a shape layer, and it has a vector mask. Just to see that vector mask a bit larger, I right click here on the empty area of my layers panel and I choose large thumbnails. Now you can see that's the vector mask with the path that I created. Now I use the path selection tool and select this object and just simply use Command C, Command V to duplicate it, and then I just simply start moving it around and use the free transform tool to make it smaller like this and place it here onto the other one. Let's just rotate it a bit more, and I try to follow the shape of the other one, the other swirl, again to have a nice continuous flow, something like this. Let's see. Okay, so now it looks these two are together, and we can continue doing the same thing. I just copy paste again another version, and now in this case I will use Alt click on one of the control points to flip the image. So Alt click can flip the image any direction. I just want to use something like this and place this here. Maybe move it a bit closer to the other element like this. So this is one element now, it's ready, and I can move it anywhere, and you can see it stays always behind her because we prepared the mask. Let me just switch back to small thumbnails for my layers. And after this, I usually change the color of the swirl by clicking on that little rectangle there in the layers panel. So I will choose a color like this, and I used overlay for the blend mode of the layer. So here choose overlay. After this, you can add the stroke around this shape by double clicking on the layer and choose stroke option. Let me just make this smaller and choose outside as the option. So 1 point size outside with less opacity. So just a very nice edge on this decoration. And then if you duplicate this element, you can see we have now two of them, and I can make this smaller and just simply place this somewhere. Around here. And because we are using overlay, you can see that the colors adds up. If you use several objects on top of each other, these colors will add up, so they will more shiny and glowy if you put them on top of each other. And of course I used several different elements, so not the same element all the time, lots of different elements, and of course different colors as well. And I've built up the right side, and then I built up the left side, doing the same thing. So let's see this now. I just delete this and I turn on the original design. And there's one last thing that I need to show you here. Also a special effect which makes this look, it glows. And that is here in both of these groups. There is left and there is in the right another layer, which makes it look more blurry or more like it glows. And I just simply duplicated all these elements, so I can show it you now. I just delete these layers, and so I have all of these elements. Let's say I select the behind layer or the left and right group of layers, and I duplicate them. Alt click and drag to duplicate it, and Command E to merge them all together. So this is now a duplicate. I put it in the background and I turn it into a smart object. Right click, convert to smart object, and then I will use the filter blur Gaussian blur option. That blurs them out, blur those elements out. And the reason why I use the smart object is because if you use a smart object, your filters will be turned into smart filters, which means that you can always make changes to them. So if I double click on Gaussian blur here now, I can always change this radius value. But I will leave it now at 16. And I click OK. And the only problem is that I need to place this left copy, the blur element, I just call this blur element, also in the behind group, which uses the mask. So I just drag it up and place it there. So now if I turn it off, you can see it's a bit too sharp, but if I turn it back on, there is the blurred element. It's like an outer glow, but I like to use the blur or Gaussian blur for outer glow because it uses the original colors instead of using a base color that I choose from the layer styles. After this, I continued drawing two other shapes and I just simply use them on top of the other group without the mask because I wanted to have some design elements also in front of her on her face. And the only interesting thing here is that I also used special blend modes for these layers. In this case, a fill of 50%, which is very similar to setting the opacity to 50%. So I just change this back to 100 and you can see it's opaque. But if I change it back to 50, then you can see it's a bit transparent. I also used a separate layer on top of this layer. I just delete it and I show you quickly what it does. So I create a new layer and I alt click between these two layers. So I have that layer and the design element or this red ribbon. And on this new layer, I just simply use my brush tool with 30% opacity and a soft edge, and I use white and draw over this part to make it look bright, and then I draw over this part with black to make it look it goes in the shadows. Maybe then I use white again here and there, just to show and emphasize the depth of this ribbon. Okay, here again I can use black to make it look like it goes back to the dark areas like that. And I also used a shadow, which I just simply created from a drop shadow layer style, and then I created a new layer from it and moved it a bit to the right. I show you how to do this. You can create a drop shadow effect. Let me just delete these effects now. I clear the layer style and I double click on the shape layer and I add the drop shadow effect. And if you select the drop shadow option, you can click on the image and move the drop shadow around. But what is more interesting is if you right click on the drop shadow effect here in the layers panel, you can choose create layer and that will turn the shadow or the effect into a layer. So I just delete the other one and I show you this layer. So now I can move the drop shadow separately because it's a separate layer, and I can change its opacity easily and use the eraser to delete the parts that I don't need. So just here and also here in the background I don't need it at all. So only on her neck. Here I just simply delete it like this. So the shadow and the lights on top of the ribbon makes it more believable or more realistic. And I did the same thing with here on the top. And then I created the stars. Now for the stars I created a custom brush. So these are the stars, and I show you how I create a custom brush. I usually create a new document, That's Command N or Control N, and I usually use 200 by 200 with 72 resolution, pixel per inch resolution. And on this new document, I use my pen tool and I quickly draw a shape, this star shape. I just quickly and roughly draw the shape that I'm looking for. And then I use Command click to move these elements around, these anchor points. Just like with the decoration, I can always tweak these elements. I just want to make these a bit longer and narrower, something like this. Okay, so I have this star shape here, and now I will select all, Command A or Control A on PC, and then I go to Edit, Define Brush Preset, and I call this star. So I saved my star, I can close this now, and I can select my brush tool, and from the brush panel I go to brush tip shape and I scroll down, and there's my star brush. I only need to set up the brush. First of all, I need scattering. So I click on scattering, and you can immediately see that it will scatter these stars around. You can change the count, you can play with the scatter option, but what I'm looking for is a shape dynamics option where I set a size jitter, which will randomize the size, and also I would like to randomize the angle, so I choose angle jitter, and maybe I change the minimum diameter a bit like this, and I also click on transfer and change the opacity jitter a bit. I increase that one as well, and also I click on controlling the opacity with my pen pressure. And the pen pressure is also assigned to the size jitter option. Now, if I start drawing with this, you will immediately see the effect that we created, but I would like to show it on a separate layer. I just fill a layer quickly with white, or let's fill it with black, and I use white for my foreground color for the brush, and I start drawing the stars. And you can see I can draw easily and quickly these stars. The only trick that I used is that I duplicated the stars. Let me just go back a bit and draw the stars on a separate layer. So there are my stars, and what I did is I duplicated this layer, and I did the same thing by using blurring to make them look they are glowing. And here I will use a bit less, something like 7 pixels for the blur. So this blur can be behind the original stars, and this is without the blur. Let me just zoom in, and this is with the blur. So I use the original elements as well and the blur elements as well. So now I delete these layers, and you can see my original stars in the background. Actually, they are in the foreground, so I place them on top of her. Some of the stars appear in front of her. That was the whole idea, just to make it look realistic. And then the last touch was to add a glow. I turn on this layer now, and I used 2 layers with purple colors and the soft light blend mode, which is for colorizing this top part. So without the glow it's green, and with the glow it's more magenta, more purple on the top. I show you quickly how I created these. I just delete them quickly, and I use my elliptical marquee tool, make a quick selection here on the top, and I pick a color. Let's pick a purple color and use Alt backspace to fill that in. I just need a new layer. So I created a new layer, Alt backspace to fill that in. Then I deselect. So go to select, deselect, and choose the Gaussian blur option again. It's like feathering after you create something. I use a big radius on this. I click OK, and then I change it to soft light, the blend mode of the layer, and I reduce the opacity back. So this is how I created the glow, and you can play with lots of colors and make it more like a fairy tale image with these special vibrant colors. So that's all the techniques that I use for this design, and I hope you learned some new tricks and that you can apply these ideas to your own designs. Remember, the best is not to copy exactly the same things that I did, so just try the same thing with another image and use your creativity to create something new and interesting. And I would love to see your designs, so if you do something similar using this technique, please post it on the wall of the Facebook page of the blog and let others see your amazing designs. Thanks a lot for your attention. I hope you enjoyed it, and make sure that you come back for more, because next time I will show another interesting tutorial. So see you soon, and good luck with these techniques.